I was about 3 weeks into working as a late-night food delivery driver when this happened, and by then I'd already gotten used to the usual weird stuff. People giving wrong addresses, customers answering the door half asleep, even the occasional argument over missing items. But nothing that actually made me feel unsafe until that one Friday night. It was just after 11:30 p.m. when I accepted an order that popped up on my app. A fairly large one from a fast food place I'd picked up from dozens of times before, going out to a neighborhood on the far edge of town that I didn't usually deliver to, mostly because it was older, quieter, and had long stretches of dark roads with barely any streetlights. I remember hesitating for a second before accepting it, mostly because the tip wasn't great and the distance was longer than I liked at that hour. But it had been a slow night, and I figured one more trip wouldn't hurt. The pickup itself was normal, nothing out of place, and within a few minutes I was back in my car, the paper bag sitting on the passenger seat, already cooling down as I pulled out of the parking lot. The drive started off fine, just empty roads and the occasional passing car, but the farther I got from the main part of town, the quieter everything became, until eventually it was just me, the sound of my engine, and the GPS voice telling me to keep going straight for another 5 miles. I noticed at some point that I hadn't seen another car for at least 10 minutes, which wasn't unusual for that area, but it still gave me this weird isolated feeling, like I'd somehow driven further out than I should have. When I finally turned onto the road the customer lived on, things felt different immediately. The houses were spaced out, some with long driveways disappearing into darkness, others completely unlit, like no one lived there at all. My headlights barely reached the edges of the road, and every now and then I'd catch something in the trees or along the side, just shapes, probably nothing, but enough to make me glance twice. The address led me to a house that looked older than the others, a single-story place with a cracked driveway and no lights on inside or outside. I double-checked the number on the mailbox, then checked my app again, and it matched. I remember thinking it was strange that someone would order food and then leave all the lights off, but I'd seen weirder things, so I grabbed the bag and stepped out of the car. The air felt colder than it should have been, and it was completely quiet, no dogs barking, no distant traffic, nothing. As I walked up the driveway, I noticed the front door was slightly open, not wide, just enough to leave a thin gap of darkness visible inside. That immediately made me uneasy, so I stopped a few steps short of the porch and called out, "Delivery!" expecting someone to respond or at least move, but nothing happened. I stood there for a few seconds, debating whether to just leave the food on the step and go, but before I could decide, the door creaked open a little more on its own, just an inch or two, like it had been pushed from the inside. I froze, staring at the doorway, waiting for someone to appear, but it stayed empty. My first thought was that maybe someone inside had opened it and stepped back, so I called out again, louder this time, but still nothing. That's when I started to feel that something wasn't right. I pulled my phone out and tried calling the customer through the app, and it rang for a while before going to voicemail. No message, no name, just a generic tone. I hung up and looked back at the door, which hadn't moved since, still slightly open, still dark inside. I didn't want to step any closer, but I also didn't want to leave without confirming the delivery, so I slowly walked up the last few steps onto the porch, keeping my distance from the doorway. The smell hit me first, faint but noticeable, like something old or damp, not strong enough to be obvious, but enough to make me wrinkle my nose. I placed the bag down near the door and stepped back immediately, already planning to mark it as delivered and leave, when I heard something from inside. It was subtle, like a soft movement, maybe a footstep on wood or something brushing against the wall. I held my breath and listened, and for a moment it was silent again, but then it happened a second time, a little clearer, definitely coming from deeper inside the house. I told myself it was probably just the customer moving around, maybe grabbing money or coming to the door, but something about the way it sounded didn't match that. It was too slow, too uneven. I backed off the porch and started walking toward my car, not running, but definitely quicker than before, and just as I reached the end of the driveway, I heard the door behind me creak open wider. I turned around without thinking, and for a split second, I thought I saw someone standing just inside the doorway, completely still, barely visible in the darkness, and then, the door slowly began to close on its own, without anyone stepping out or saying a word, and that was the moment I realized I might have just delivered food to a house where no one was supposed to be. About halfway back to my car, I stopped without really meaning to, like something in my head was trying to process what I'd just seen, or thought I'd seen, standing in that doorway. I kept telling myself it was just the lighting, or maybe someone standing further back in the house, but the way the door had moved didn't sit right with me. It hadn't slammed or even shut normally, it had just eased itself closed, slow and steady, like whoever was inside didn't want to be heard. I got into my car and locked the doors immediately, which wasn't something I usually did unless I was in a really sketchy area. I sat there for a second, engine running, headlights still pointed at the house, and I told myself to just leave. I had already marked the order as delivered on the app, so technically my job was done, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I looked down at my phone and noticed something that made my stomach tighten a little. The order had no delivery instructions, which wasn't unusual, but under the customer details, instead of a name, it just said, no name at all, just a dash. I was pretty sure I hadn't noticed that earlier. I tapped into the order details again to double-check, thinking maybe it was a glitch, but it still showed the same thing. No name, no notes, just the address. That's when I remembered the call I made. No voicemail greeting, no identification, just that blank tone. I sat there for another few seconds, staring at the house, trying to decide if I should just drive off or maybe report it somehow, when something inside the house caught my attention again. A light flickered on, but not in a normal way. It wasn't like someone flipping a switch. It was dim, almost like a small lamp or maybe a flashlight, and it moved slowly from one side of the front room to the other, casting faint shadows across the windows. I leaned forward slightly in my seat, trying to see more clearly, but the glare from my headlights made it hard. The light stopped for a moment near the front door, just behind where I had been standing a minute earlier, and then it disappeared completely. My heart was beating faster now, and I realized I was gripping the steering wheel tighter than I should have been. I told myself again to just leave, and this time I actually shifted the car into reverse, but before I could back out of the driveway, something moved right at the edge of my headlights. It was fast, low to the ground, like a shadow darting from one side of the yard to the other. I slammed the brakes instinctively, even though I hadn't really started moving yet, and stared at the spot where I'd seen it. Nothing was there anymore. I scanned the yard, the trees, the porch, but everything looked still again. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and shook my head, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination getting the better of me. Maybe it was an animal, a stray dog or something, but I hadn't heard any footsteps, no rustling, nothing. Just that quick movement, and then gone. I finally backed out of the driveway, keeping my eyes on the house the entire time, half expecting the door to open again or someone to step out, but nothing happened. As soon as I was back on the road, I accelerated a little faster than usual, putting distance between me and that place as quickly as I could. I didn't feel normal again until I reached a more populated area, where there were streetlights and other cars on the road. I pulled into a gas station a few miles away and parked under one of the bright overhead lights, just to take a moment and clear my head. I grabbed my phone again and opened the app, thinking maybe I should report the order or at least flag it somehow, but when I went into my delivery history, the order was gone, completely gone, like it had never been there in the first place. I refreshed the app a few times, checked my earnings for the night, and even scrolled through past deliveries. But there was no record of it. No address, no payment, nothing. That didn't make any sense, because I had just completed it maybe 10 minutes ago. I checked my call log next, and even the call I had made to the customer wasn't there anymore. At that point, I felt this cold wave of panic start to creep in, because it was like the entire thing had just been erased. I sat there in my car, staring at my phone, trying to come up with any logical explanation, but none of it added up. And then, just as I was about to put my phone down, a new notification popped up from the app. It wasn't a new order, and it wasn't anything I'd seen before. It was just a single line of text, no sound, no alert, just appearing silently at the top of the screen. It read, "Delivery incomplete. Return to location." I froze, staring at it, my finger hovering over the screen, and before I could even react, the notification disappeared on its own, like it had never been there, leaving me sitting in that gas station parking lot with one question stuck in my mind. If that delivery was incomplete, then who, or what, had closed that door while I was standing right there? Part 3 ready? I sat there in the gas station parking lot longer than I want to admit, engine still running, staring at my phone like it might explain itself if I just waited long enough, but nothing else popped up, no new notifications, no trace of that order anywhere in the app, and the more I thought about it, the more it felt like I had just imagined the whole thing, except I knew I hadn't, because I could still picture that house perfectly. The cracked driveway, the dark doorway, and that brief moment where I was almost certain someone had been standing just inside. I told myself to just go home and forget about it, but instead I did something I still don't really understand. I'd opened my maps and typed the address back in manually, just to see it again, to confirm it was real, and when it came up, it looked normal enough, just another property on that same road, no warnings, no notes, nothing unusual. I sat there for another minute, then, against my better judgment, I started driving back. The roads were even quieter now, past midnight, and the further I went, the more I questioned why I was doing this at all. But there was something about the whole situation that didn't sit right, like I needed to see it one more time just to make sense of it. When I turned onto that same road again, everything looked exactly as it had before, the same dark stretches, the same spaced-out houses, but this time I noticed something I hadn't earlier. A few of the houses had lights on now, faint ones through windows, like people were awake, but none of them showed any movement. When I reached the address, I slowed down and pulled over across the street instead of going into the driveway. The house looked completely different. Every light was off again, just like before, but the front door was now fully closed, no gap, no movement, nothing. For a moment, I actually felt relieved, like maybe I had overreacted earlier, but that feeling didn't last long. I got out of the car, keeping the engine running this time, and stood by the side of the road, looking at the house from a distance. The silence was heavier than before, almost unnatural, like the kind of quiet that makes you aware of every small sound you make. I wasn't planning on going up to the door again, not this time, but as I stood there, I noticed something near the edge of the driveway, just barely visible in the dim light from my headlights. It looked like the paper bag I had left earlier. That didn't make sense, because I was sure I had placed it right next to the door, not halfway down the driveway. I took a few slow steps closer, trying to get a better look, and yeah, it was definitely the same bag. It was tipped over on its side now, the contents partially spilled out, and from where I was standing, it looked like something had been taken out of it. I stopped moving, my chest tightening again, because there was no reason for that bag to be there unless someone had picked it up and brought it down. I glanced back at the house, half expecting to see someone watching me from the doorway or a window, but everything was still dark. That's when I heard it. A faint sound coming from somewhere behind me this time, not from the house. It was subtle, like footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate. I turned around quickly, scanning the road and the trees lining it, but I didn't see anyone. The sound stopped immediately. I stood there, listening, my heart pounding, trying to figure out if it had been real or just my imagination again. But then it happened a second time, closer now, just a few steps behind where I had been standing. I didn't wait to see anything this time. I turned and walked fast back to my car, not running, but close enough, and as I reached for the door handle, I heard one last sound, clear enough that I couldn't ignore it. A voice, low and close, right behind me, saying just 2 words. "You forgot." I got into the car so fast I almost dropped my keys, slammed the door, and locked it immediately, my hands shaking as I looked up into the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone standing there, but there was nothing. The road behind me was empty. I didn't even think about it after that. I just drove, faster than I should have, not looking back, not stopping until I was back in a busy part of town again. I didn't deliver for the rest of the night, and I didn't go anywhere near that area again after that. A few days later, out of curiosity more than anything, I tried looking up that address online, just to see if anything came up, maybe a listing or a record of who lived there, but the only thing I could find was an old property listing from years ago that said the house had been vacant for a long time. No recent activity, no current owner listed. I still think about that sometimes, especially the way that bag had moved and that voice at the end. Because if the house was really empty like it said, then there shouldn't have been anyone there to order food in the first place. And definitely no one close enough behind me to whisper like that without me ever seeing them.